Greetings all, Ferrari Man 601 here. Welcome to another 1/18th scale model car looking at video. Today we have got the 2008 Ferrari F2008 here, rendered in 1/18th scale by Mattel Hot Wheels. I've had this model since the end of 2008, which does make it actually a 2008 car, technically speaking. Obviously, this is the Ferrari which won Ferrari's last Constructors' Championship to date, all the way back in 2008, very nearly 10 years ago. It's got the number 1 on it, it's got Kimi Räikkönen in the cockpit, so yes, this is the car with which Räikkönen competed in his reigning championship season back in 2008. It was not the best year for Kimi, however his teammate Felipe Massa technically won the World Championship for 30 or so seconds at the 2008 Brazilian Grand Prix before Lewis Hamilton passed Timo Glock. Anyway, let's take a look at the F2008 and show you what's going on. First of all, you can see the F2008 with a ton of aerodynamic development on board. This is the last year for the old aero formula, basically going back to 1995 or so. This general shape of car is what we saw all the way up and down the pit lane, basically starting with Williams, and then everybody else started to copy them. The car very low slung with a reasonably long wheelbase, although much shorter wheelbase than what we see in 2017 because, yes, there was refueling allowed in this era. However, we have got the 2.4 liter V8. In 2008, the rev limit was a mandatory 19,000 RPM, and also 2008 was the first year for the standardized electronic control unit, the ECU, manufactured by McLaren Electronic Systems. The ECU was standardized that year, partially to reduce costs and partially to police systems like traction control. 2007 was the last year for traction control in Formula One, so 2008, pretty much everything manual in terms of the traction. Therefore, the driver's right foot was the traction control, and it has remained so forevermore for the most part, at least in an official sense. The F2008, it is therefore the last evolution of that 1995 to 2008 aerodynamic philosophy, and honestly, these 2008 cars still to this day are my favorite in terms of an aero design study. They are absolutely awesome. The amount of development that was able to happen basically in those 12-13 years between 95 to 2008, really fantastic. Everywhere you look on this car, there are canard wings, little turning vanes, bits and bobs, chimneys, little winglets, and of course the absolutely huge rear wings on these cars. Really, really fantastic stuff. Kimi Räikkönen did not have the best season in 2008, as we mentioned. I believe he only won 2 races that year. Don't quote me on that. I've got to really check through the results, but I know that he won in Spain and he won in Malaysia. Yes, 2 races he won that year. Gee, I haven't looked at the 2008 season in quite a while, yet my stats are still reasonable. Not too bad. Felipe Massa, therefore, he took the balance of the wins that year. Out of the F2007's 8 wins, Massa took 6 of them. It scored a further 19 podium positions, 8 pole positions, and set 13 fastest laps out of the 18 races that season. As mentioned, it did win the Constructors' Championship in 2008, but the Drivers' Championship went the way of McLaren and Lewis Hamilton. However, let's have a look at some of the details here on this F2008 by Mattel. First off, you will notice that the livery on this car is slightly different than what we saw in most of the races that year. Back then, in 2008, Mattel did most of their models based on the launch spec, or at very least the round 1, round 2 spec of these cars. So there are a few livery details which are absent on this. Also, you've got to remember tobacco sponsorship on these models. They're marketing them largely to children, so they don't want to put tobacco sponsorship on them. But nonetheless, you can see the car as it did pretty much appear at the beginning of the season. Also, there are a few aero details on this car that are not modeled. Most notably, here at the front end of the chassis, you will notice the absence of the S-duct that Ferrari debuted in 2008. The S-duct obviously being a duct that runs through the nose section as well as through the front of the monocoque, helping to channel air from underneath the car to the top side of the car to aid a little bit in downforce generation and turbulence regulation, basically helping the turbulence around the cockpit area, as well as obviously adding a significant amount of front-end downforce without really adding much drag. Really innovative solution, and Ferrari were the first to feature that in 2008. I believe they debuted that spec of the car at the Spanish Grand Prix that year, which Kimi Räikkönen consequently won. Additionally on the car, looking here at the front end, you can definitely see that we've got that double plane front wing there. We'll have another look at that as it comes back around. And then the rest of the car, really, it is a logical development of the line of Ferrari F1 cars that you can trace back pretty much to the F2002 from the 2002 season. The F2002 and really the F2001 before it were such good cars that Ferrari did not quite see much of a reason to change them all that much year to year. So the amount of development that happened for Ferrari during this era was very incremental. The F2002, you can definitely see a lot of family resemblance if you compare the 02 to the 08 car, but this front wing in particular was a very interesting design. Ferrari started to experiment with their front wing design pretty much at the start of the 2005 season. They ran this really interesting second main plane, if you will, below the main plane of the front wing starting in 2005. Really, at the start of 05, when they were still running the F2004, they debuted that new front wing on the F2004M, as it were. And then the F2005 featured that wing all throughout the season. For 2006 and the start of the V8 formula, they debuted this double element, this double main plane, if you like, bridge wing front wing with this upper element that you can see here attaching to the sides of the nose proper rather than the main plane of the wing mounted on those pylons. That debuted on the 248 F1 in 2006, and then Ferrari continued with that design all the way up through 2008, as we can quite obviously see here. Essentially, it's the same design as we saw starting on the 248 for 2006, but it has been refined here in 2008 spec. Additionally, we can see the suspension layout. It is a double wishbone push rod front and rear, so very conventional for the era. Here in 2017, the car's still running double wishbone push rod, but most of the teams, actually all the teams, have now started to run pull rod exclusively on the rear. Additionally, in terms of the modeling details, you can see sponsorship graphics there, very nicely modeled. I will say, I think they are ever so slightly off-center relative to the center line of the nose, but hey, good enough for me, good enough for mass production, so there it is. Also here, you can see here front wing and front nose cone detail, as well as some tire detail. Another interesting feature on this car, and this continued all the way up through 2008, it was a little loophole in the regulations, are these wheels here. Now, there's nothing particularly different about the wheels themselves, but there are fairings mounted over top of the front wheels and actually the rear wheels on this car as well. This is part of the brake duct officially, but really what it's doing two purposes. It is helping to extract some of that hot air from around the wheel hub to cool the brakes, but additionally it is just helping to smooth some of the tire wash that's coming from around those wheels. Again, an open-wheeled car, those wheels, as they're spinning around, generate a lot of vortices and therefore drag, so these disc sections, these stationary elements over the wheels help to sort of smooth out some of that wash. And you can see here as the wheel is rotated, that center hub stays stationary. They were able to get around the regulations here by calling it part of the brake duct rather than calling it part of the wheel, and therefore they were allowed to stay on the car until the end of the 2009 season, believe it or not. Here in the midsection, you can see that barge board detail going on here. Very complicated barge board elements, similar in design to what we started to see again back on the F2002, but here just even more so refined for 2008. Of course, for 2009, the cars were completely chopped up as far as the rule book was concerned in terms of aerodynamics, so this represents the zenith of this sort of development in this era and basically throughout all of Formula One up to 2017. This area here, you can see lower barge boards and the extreme low front section of the monocoque, and then the principal barge boards, and then we've got turning vanes here on the outboard side of the side pods. Really nice detail. This particular turning vane, winglet, whatever you want to call it, this is actually returned in 2017 on the Ferrari, and Red Bull and Mercedes also running similar turning vanes in 2017. So interesting that we see some of these older aero specifications coming back in the modern era. Very, very cool to see. Additionally on the car, you can see these two canard wings. This was a feature that was debuted on the F2007 the previous year, I believe at the French Grand Prix. So Ferrari retained those for 2008, and Mercedes actually running similar canards here in 2017. Their car debuted with these canard wings, and since Red Bull and Ferrari have added these similar canard wings again in 2017. But I remember reading back in 2007 when they debuted these wings on the F2007 that they were so sharp that they had to be covered up when the car was in the garage. Otherwise, if a mechanic just absent-mindedly brushed his arm or something against it, he could actually be cut quite severely. So sharp was the leading edge and tip profile on those canard wings. They're nowhere near that sharp on the model, but you could definitely tell Ferrari being very precise with how they are directing the airflow through the front section of the car. We turn the car around here, you can definitely tell the direction of that airflow off of those canard wings. They're trying to condition it to enter the radiator ducts a little bit. Additionally, you can tell that they are trying to create some sort of interaction between the tip of the canard and the mirror housing here, the mirror fairing, probably just generating some wingtip vortices if you like. Interesting. Looking at those radiator inlets, almost identical to what we saw on the 248 F1 as well as on the F2007. Same engine going from the 248 in 2006 all the way up through here in 2008. It's that same 056 unit, 2.4 liter V8, naturally aspirated, but revving slightly lower than it did in 06. They were hitting 20,000 RPM by the end of 2006. Here they're limited to 19,000 RPM. The F2008 is also a little bit heavier than its predecessor, the F2007, as well as the 248, because the FIA instituted slightly more stringent crash tests for 2008. Additionally, you can see the head surround here in the cockpit, just around the driver's helmet. That is higher than it was on its predecessors. Again, just a little bit more protection necessary for the driver's helmet there. And this is a trend that we still see in Formula One with the introduction of the dreaded halo device. Yes, I do believe that the reason for those extended cockpit bolsters in 08 was almost exclusively due to an incident at the 2007 Australian Grand Prix between David Coulthard and Alex Wurz, in which David Coulthard went over the top of the car of Alex Wurz, driving for Williams at the time, and the side of Coulthard's car came very close to the helmet of Alex Wurz, and therefore could have cost him some significant injury had Coulthard just been a few inches arrears of where he actually did contact Wurz's car. So higher cockpit bolstering there. And it's not just the padding that surrounds the driver's helmet, it is actually the side of the monocoque that comes up higher. So a car passing over top of the cockpit area would reach some significant resistance. And we saw an incident play out at the 2012 Belgian Grand Prix involving Fernando Alonso and Romain Grosjean. Lotus went over top of the Ferrari. Definitely that cockpit bolstering did its job in that circumstance. So interesting safety improvement. On the rear wing, we can see it here, deep dish spoon section, not very dissimilar from what teams are still running today. I remember in 2015 and 2016 for the Belgian Grand Prix, Mercedes ran what they were calling some sort of S-wing, I believe, but basically it's a deep main plane spoon profile there, as we're seeing here all the way back in 2008. Really, really cool stuff, I must say. Starting up the rotation again, looking at the rear section of the car now, we can see that we've got these turning vanes that we started to see in F1 really beginning in 2003, 2004, and then for the rear section of the car, lots of louvers, lots of air being extracted from this particular location, and those exhausts there exiting top side. We would continue to see top side exhausts into 2010 in a lot of cases, but then Red Bull pioneered, or reintroduced I should say, the exhaust blown diffuser beginning in 2009, where they were actually trying to cover it up by running fake exhausts, basically decals or even plastic decoy exhausts, just to try and ward off photographers and spying team personnel. However, Red Bull, they brought the exhaust blown diffuser back into Formula One, and then everybody started to copy it forevermore. So the topside exhaust still here on the F2007, but they would be absent from cars basically after the 2010 season. We still see them on the Ferrari in 2010, however. Here, the rear section, you can see the other profile of the rear wing. This area where it has Etihad Airways printed, that area was painted black not too long into the season, but here on the launch spec livery it's still red, but we can see the supports for the rear wing as well as the beam wing here down at the bottom, lower element of the rear wing. Additionally, we can see the rear suspension quite nicely, again double wishbone push rod, and then the diffuser, the central tunnel of the diffuser, and then the outer elements of the diffuser. Very similar, basically, in its size and scope as the diffuser beginning on the F2002 again. So a lot of F2002 DNA in this car as well. Additionally, get a good shot of the grooved Bridgestone tires. Control tire, second year for that controlled tire, Bridgestone being the sole tire supplier. But yes, very, very cool details indeed on this car. Some of the shortcomings on this car, though, in terms of what Mattel did with it, there are a couple things that do just draw your attention. In the cockpit, first of all, you'll notice the steering wheel here. Yes, it is a steering wheel, and it even has some amount of detail on it, which actually is not quite that bad, considering what Mattel were doing in the era. They certainly have gotten better, particularly with their Elite line, but back in '08, this was what they did. You can see that the steering wheel is this semicircular shape, and, well, that's okay. But Ferrari changed their steering wheel from a semicircular one to a rectangular one in 2008, yet Mattel have retained the same steering wheel that they used basically going all the way back to their F2002 model. So a little bit of cost savings there potentially in the Mattel organization, but yeah, you can see obviously the steering is functional on this model, and that's always really, really nice. Also, in terms of the model, interesting choice of tire compound, I must say. All of my other Mattel F1 models, the tires are really hard. They're almost like rocks. However, this one, they are actually quite pliable. You can squeeze them and they deform with the pressure you put on them, so interesting. It actually does kind of make it useful if you want to display the model on an inclined surface. It is actually a little bit more grippy. But yeah, that's what you've got going on here with the F2008. Other details in terms of the livery, sponsorship graphics, it's all appropriate. It is slightly cut down from how the car actually raced. There are no alcohol or tobacco advertisements here. I don't believe that the F2008 ever ran tobacco advertisements. Maybe in Monaco, but I may be confusing myself with 2007 as well. So I don't know, quite honestly, if the car ever ran with those Marlboro decals on it. They'd be on the engine cover and probably somewhere on the barge board as well. But they're not to be seen. Additionally, you're not seeing any Martini branding on the car, but you are seeing all of the telecom companies, the banking companies, the fuel companies, all that kind of stuff. Obviously, Shell being Ferrari's fuel supplier back then, and Fiat being the big parent company for the whole outfit. Obviously, all of your obligatory Bridgestone logos that the FIA mandated that everybody run, and then AMD for some of their computing power in the era. Of course, all punctuated with the Italian flag, ever patriotic, the Ferrari team. I will say that given that the car did develop quite a bit over the course of the season, as Formula One cars are always apt to do, it is a shame that it doesn't have the S-Duct on it. I do believe that there are later models that were made later on after 2008 that do feature the S-Duct. I'm not entirely sure if there is an Elite line. So Mattel Elite, that is their higher end range of models. I don't know if there was ever an Elite version of this car, but if there is, I wouldn't be surprised if it features the S-Duct. But nonetheless, it is still a really, really cool one. And in particular, that little wreath there on the side of the snorkel, that is something that Ferrari always put on their cars the season after they win the Constructors' Championship. So that's their little emblem of we are the reigning champions. We haven't seen that on a Ferrari for 10 years now. That's something that really needs to change, and quite soon. So hopefully, they couldn't do it in 2007, but in 2017 rather, they did do it in 2007 and 2008, but they couldn't do it this year in 2017, but perhaps they'll be able to do it next year in 2018, and we'll see that little wreath back on the car someplace, telling the world that the Constructors' Championship belongs to Maranello. However, that's all I've got for you today in terms of the Ferrari F2008. Hopefully that was interesting for you. I got a request to feature this car again in a video. The last time I featured this car was about 7 years ago, I want to say. I'll put a link to that video in the description. It's one of my early ones, and it's terrible, but you'll be able to see, yes, it's the same car. I've had it for a long time, and it's really, really cool. So hopefully you enjoyed that today. As always, thank you all very much for watching. Ferrari Man 601 saying thank you, and we will see you soon.